This sitting is resumed. Prior to the suspension for lunch, we were in Standing Finance Committee. We returned to Standing Finance Committee.
This House is in Standing Finance Committee. Honourable Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. It is my honor to present the Energy Division of the Ministry of Energy and Business. This is, I think, one of the things that we are very clear on as a government as the growth sector of the future. It is the opportunity for national transformation to take place within the context of our renewable energy agenda. And I think it is very clear to all who have been following the position taken by this government that the energy sector, in particular our renewable energy agenda, is meant to position Barbados not just to meet our climate change goals in terms of our net zero transition, but also our sustainable development goals, ensuring that Barbados as a small island developing state is able to effect what we call a just transition. A transition that isn't just about the sectors, it isn't just about photovoltaic panels, it isn't just about wind energy, but it is also about creating a space where people can thrive. A just transition where new jobs can be created, a just transition where new training and education opportunities are created for our people, and with it, new opportunities for enfranchisement and economic empowerment. And so this is the agenda of the government of Barbados as executed by this ministry in collaboration with our stakeholder partners. Our stakeholder partners are both local and global. But I'm going to start, first of all, with the team that on a daily basis takes responsibility for leading this government's energy agenda. I am joined, I believe, earlier as we navigated the business sector. We had Permanent Secretary Jennifer Hunt, who is to my left. To my right now, this afternoon, I am joined by Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Energy, Mr. Andrew Gittins. Also from the Ministry at Central Government, I am joined by the Director of Natural Resources, Mr. Jamar White, the Chief Project Analyst, Mr. Brian Haynes, the Chief Energy Officer, Mr. William Hines. We also have with us the Program Manager for the Smart Energy Fund, Ms. Rosalind Griffith. From the Barbados National Oil Company Limited, we have the Chief Executive Officer, Mr. James Brown, and I wish to offer apologies for the absence of Chairman, Mr. Vic Fernandes, who is presiding as we speak over the monthly board meeting for the Barbados National Oil Company. We also have with us the Chief Executive Officer, the General Manager of the National Petroleum Corporation, Ms. Michelle Smith. We also have members who were here earlier this morning who remain with us on the business side. The General Manager for Barbados Fund Access, They are here as the executing agency with responsibility for the Smart Energy Program and the Smart Energy Fund, and of course, an entity that is known to most, the Fair Trading Commission, represented today by their chairman, Ms. Tammy Bryan, and their CEO, Ms. Marsha Okechi. So we have a complete team that is here with us today, and they will be guiding us through the various elements of what this ministry has been doing. But I want to start by highlighting some of the accomplishments of this ministry. Oftentimes when we talk about energy in the public space, there is a conversation around photovoltaic panels, connections to the grid, Barbados Light and Power, and expansion of the grid, but there is so much more that is being done by the Ministry of Energy, and I want to take a few moments in my opening to share what those things are. As you would recall, Mr. Chairman, last year in the budget presentation by the Honourable Prime Minister, the Householders' Right to Renewable Energy Program was launched. That program gave householders the right to install up to 10 kilowatts of renewable energy on their homes, and an entire electric portal was established that now manages that process. It makes it easier for persons who are applying for that right to renewable energy to submit and to manage their application. So far, over the last year, a total of 198 householders have been registered. We also, in partnership with the ministry and the Fair Trading Commission, have worked extensively on power purchase agreements. These power purchase agreements pair the Barbados Light and Power as a monopoly service provider with a range of investors and independent power producers in both solar, wind, biomass, and other forms of renewable energy. And so power purchase agreements for renewable energy systems under 10 megawatts have been completed in collaboration with the FTC. The former minister who preceded me, the Honourable Kerry Simmons, would have in one of his last bodies of work prior to exiting the ministry and transferring over to a new area of responsibility, led the charge to create the Electricity Supply Bill. This is the first comprehensive reform legislatively of the electricity supply legislation that has taken place in decades. This body of work is presently with the Chief Parliamentary Council for review. Once that comes back to the ministry, we will begin the process of consultations that is expected to take between 4 to 6 weeks. Once we have completed those consultations, we then will take an amended document back up to Cabinet for Cabinet's consideration and hopefully approval. And then finally, that draft will be resubmitted to the Chief Parliamentary Council for final preparation in readiness for Parliament and its final approval. Mr. President, Mr. Chairman, the ministry in collaboration with the FTC has also finalized a PPA in draft on a green energy park biomass project, and we are hoping that between these two partners that they can conclude negotiations on the commercial terms, which will then be subject to the approval of the FTC. There's also been an electricity grid storage policy for the RE sector, which was approved by Cabinet, and that is currently being implemented, and the Fair Trading Commission is working on tariffs for storage. Now, earlier this morning, before coming to this honorable chamber, I had the privilege of opening the Energy Storage Forum in partnership with USAID, a support program with the US government. And there we talked extensively about the challenges being faced by countries like Barbados on the issues relating to storage and the support being offered by partners like the US, like USAID, to those countries to respond to that. And each time we have a conversation around what is happening with grid stability, grid modernization, and grid storage, they're all interconnected themes that are occupying the attention of the ministry. And what do I mean when I say that? As I described this morning at the USAID Government of Barbados Ministry of Energy event on storage, I gave the example, Mr. Chairman, of when you plug in a number of items into a switch, perhaps not very different to this. I believe this switch here, this strip here, has 6 plugs, and we were describing what happens if I were to plug my washing machine, my dryer, my microwave, my stove, my oven, and my curling iron all into that strip, what would happen? And the description that I gave this morning, this is based on what the engineers attempting to simplify it in the public space. We have been looking at how we explain this in a simplified way. If you were to plug all of those things into a single strip, it simply would trip. And you would either have to expand your electricity breaker, or you would have to plug some things out. And quite simply, our grid is the equivalent of this 6-strip plug outlet in front of me, where we have to now manage how much more we onboard onto the grid before we then get into expansion. And so we are at that stage where we have to expand the grid. There must be a modernization program for the grid, and we are very much actively engaged in those conversations with the Barbados Light and Power. Equally so, what that has meant is that there has been an equivalent conversation with storage, so that we are then in a position where, as we onboard more and more systems onto the grid, that is being balanced to ensure stability with access to storage. Mr. Chairman, in 2022, the offshore licensing round was launched, and we are expecting that before the end of this quarter of the financial year 2023, that we will actually begin the bid round. And so we're looking forward to having that engagement, and that relates specifically to our offshore oil and gas blocks, and there are 26 of them. We will be speaking a little bit more during the course of today's presentation on those things. Draft content, local content legislation has been completed and is currently being reviewed by the ministry. That is a collaboration which is underway with the Commonwealth Secretariat and with the India Fund, and we have held, at least very recently, 3 weeks ago, a local content workshop where the Commonwealth Secretariat and their team joined us here in Barbados to collaborate with our entire business community, service providers, to ensure that there is that component of local content in all investment. There have been, to date, 3 workshops, and as I mentioned before, the last of which was held here in Barbados just 3 weeks ago. I mentioned, Chairman, that we have with us the representative from the Smart Energy Fund, and it is under the umbrella of that fund that the government, under this ministry, has procured additional electric buses for the Barbados Transport Board. One of the things that we've talked about a lot as a government is what happened when we first came to office in 2018 and the state of the fleet of the Barbados Transport Board. Not only were we looking to have an expansion and an upgrade of the fleet, but in this instance, we were seeking to ensure that that upgrade was consistent with our renewable energy targets. And so the procurement of electric buses for the Transport Board has been done under the Energy Smart Fund. This fund has also been recapitalized and expanded to include SMEs. And as a result, it provides grants and low-interest loans to enterprises in the renewable energy sector. Ms. Esther Graham, who is here from Fund Access, will be in a position to speak about what has happened there under the project, as well as the project team leader. We have also, in recent months, made amendments to the offshore petroleum legislation, in particular dealing with the environmental impact assessment approval period. You may recall that under the existing legislation, time period for completion was well over 365 days. We have now truncated that time frame to allow for parallel processes, which would allow us to have the licensing, consultations, and fiscal frameworks developed within under 150 days. This draft legislation will also allow us to have the 2022 licensing round, which has already been launched, and provide for new fast-track licensing procedures in the sector. Under the ministry, Mr. Chairman, we have 2 agencies as well, and they will be speaking in great detail a little later. I'll start first with the work of the National Petroleum Corporation. There is an ongoing project relating to pipeline replacements, and that is ongoing across Barbados in different parts of the country. What we're doing now is retiring aged pipeline, much as has been done for the Barbados Water Authority and is ongoing for the Barbados Water Authority. The same thing applies to the National Petroleum Corporation. I think perhaps one of the things that the Barbados Water Authority has spoken about in great length, and the Honourable Deputy Prime Minister, who is Minister with responsibility for the Barbados Water Authority, also has spoken about how much lost water there is as a result of aged infrastructure. The same applies, Mr. Chairman, to the National Petroleum Corporation. In a recent retreat a week ago, together with BNOCL and MPC, one of the officers described non-revenue water. And we all chuckled because we said that is a very diplomatic way of saying water loss, water leakages. And that is what MPC has been dealing with. They're working with aged pipelines, and that is contributing to loss and unaccounted for gas. They're looking also to enhance the grid presence in the network and to enhance public safety measures due to the stability of the pipeline. So in the same way that we have been describing, again, the Barbados Water Authority, some of the infrastructure in this pipeline has been in the system for over 30 years. We are now embarked on a program to upgrade and to change out that pipeline. The Public Finance Management Act is something that, from a governance perspective, has been a part of the suite of measures implemented by this government starting in 2019 with that legislation, and it requires all of the agencies to provide reports in designated formats, in designated timeframes. And so what we found when we came was that annual reports. There were 7 outstanding annual reports, and we are now working on ensuring that we can complete all of the annual reports, annualizing the work of the entity up to 2022, which then will position us to be in a position to implement, to complete the annual report for this financial year, because each year has to build on the previous year. The MPC is also engaging, Mr. Chairman, in meter calibration. This has been outstanding since 2016, and this facilitates the checking of all the meters in the system to determine meter effectiveness. This is work which is ongoing and is designed to ensure gas measurement accuracy in the meters, in particular those that are located at residences or businesses. It also, Mr. Chairman, has an impact on non-revenue gas. In terms of the BNOCL, we have an entity, Mr. Chairman, that has a solid customer base of close to 300 customers in the domestic RE space, and this is since 2020. We also have fuel contracts for a number of the majors, including Sol and the Barbados Light and Power, in particular fuel oil, and this is critical in ensuring that we can mitigate the supply risks that have been created as a result of the absence of a storage tank at Holborn. We also have been working, Mr. Chairman, extensively with BNOCL, and we are preparing to meet with the suppliers very shortly, because we understand that with the fluctuation in global oil prices and the global shortages in some instances of what we describe as dirty ships to be able to transport fuel oil, fuel products generally, that there has to be some level of energy security inbuilt into our negotiations. And so we are working through what that looks like with our supply partners. We also have successfully won the tendering, which is part of the expansion of the business lines of the BNOCL, and we are now partnering with the BNOCL and the National Petroleum Corporation to ensure that we can provide bunkering services to ships in the Bridgetown port. This is a part of the commercial portfolio to expand the revenue base of these entities, so that as more and more ships are using cleaner fuels, that we in Barbados will not just be able to produce locally, but we're also able to import for re-export as part of that transshipment hub that our Prime Minister has articulated. Mr. Chairman, there's so much more that I could share over time, including the work which is being done by the MPC up at Sam North Castle to be able to onboard new suppliers like a brand new hotel. the work that is being done also to bring new commercial customers onto the pipeline with the National Petroleum Corporation so that we are able to use cleaner forms of fuel, specifically natural gas over diesel. Those are among the things that we are presently working on. And over the course of the rest of the evening, Mr. Chairman, we will be sharing more and more of the work that this ministry is doing to position Barbados for its energy future. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Honourable Minister, for your overview. Just let me, for the benefit of those who are joining us for the first time as part of this debate, just let me go through the rules for you. The Minister has 5 minutes to respond to any questions. Members of the team have 3 minutes to respond to a question that may be asked, directed at them. Honourable members are very familiar with the procedure, but just let me reiterate, you have 3 minutes. Your questions to the minister should not exceed 3 minutes. You are allowed a follow-up question as well. And you have a total of 3 questions each member can ask. And I would ask that while we would want to give our questions some context, that we do not, if you exhaust your full 3 minutes with the preamble to the question, then you will obviously, the chair will have to act accordingly. Honourable member for St. Michael West.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, Honourable Minister and team. I fully support your opening statement, especially to the importance of the Ministry of Energy against the backdrop of...
Before you move on, Honourable Minister, I wanted to say this. I want members to speak into the mic so that you are absolutely clear for both persons recording and for the members of the teams that are here, so that we're absolutely clear on what you're saying. Thank you.
Especially against the backdrop of our national energy policy, which states that we will seek to have energy independence and carbon neutrality by 2030. At this time, in my mind, I think that policy was forward-thinking and progressive, especially with what's happening in global affairs today with the Russia-Ukraine war and increased post-COVID demand for goods and services. So it's against this backdrop that we've seen in this fiscal year alone, our oil imports, cost of oil imports increase essentially double over what it was in the previous fiscal year. So this policy is of tantamount importance to a small island developing state like Barbados. But I see 2 things that can impede our progress here, and this leads to my first question. Now, in your opening statement, Minister, you did make mention of seeking to look at storage solutions as it pertains to having grid connections. So in this first question, as you're very aware, the Barbados Light and Power has indicated that they will be unable to support further interconnections to the grid, specifically from renewable sources, due to the same very grid instability that you mentioned in your opening statement. So that I would think is an impediment to our policy, our energy policy. What does the Ministry of Energy have planned to facilitate that to get moving again?
Thank you for the question, Honourable Member. We have a challenge, as you have quite rightly described, with regard to energy storage, but let me put that in context first. So we have an Integrated Resource and Resilience Plan, the IIRP, which was done in 2021. The IIRP outlines that Barbados needs 280 megawatts of storage, and that is by 2030. We presently have approximately 5 megawatts of storage on the grid. So let's start there. There's a gap immediately between the 5 megawatts that we currently have and the 280 megawatts that we need. So that's the starting point. What we have started to do with the Barbados Light and Power is navigate what that should look like, what level of investment is going to be required to enable us to meet the targets that we have set. Barbados Light and Power, in their engagements with us as a ministry and with us as a government more broadly, they have indicated to us that if we were to procure at this point 200 megawatts in the interim of battery storage, that should account for approximately $800 million in an investment. That is in addition to the additional investment that is required for the grid modernization and expansion of other works that they need to undertake. So it is a sizable investment, but I'm going to ask also other members of the team to speak about not just what we have determined as the energy mix, because as you would know, we have the energy mix which speaks about renewables and from different sources, including solar, PV, wind, and other sources. But we have begun a conversation internal to the ministry about what the storage mix also needs to look like. Once upon a time, we were discussing the issue of storage purely from a perspective of battery storage. Now, at the ministry level, we are looking at the different types of storage that may be available to be able to meet our needs, and why. The issue that we have begun to navigate, and we have a team of consultants also advising the Fair Trading Commission, and they function separately on the outside of the ministry, but we're going to invite them for as much as they can say, given that they are a quasi-judicial agency, what they want to add to the question of the storage mix. But what we have found in our analysis coming into the ministry is that, Chairman, the average shelf life, the average lifespan of a lithium-ion battery is between 7 to 10 years at maximum. 7 years on average, 10 years maximum. And so on that basis, the average rate of return on that battery would mean that the costs that would be inbuilt into producing electricity with a battery storage system would be significantly higher than we would want them to be. And so on that basis, the ministry is presently determining what our storage mix would be. Of that 200 megawatts of storage that we need, how much of it should be batteries? How much of it should be issues relating to pump storage? There are, based on our consultants' advice to us, there are emerging technologies that we expect to see enter the market in 3 to 4 years. And do we leave investment space available for us to be able to procure those technologies within a 3 to 4 year time frame, given that the lifespan of the batteries is only 7 to 10 in principle? So those are all some of the policy considerations that we're navigating as a ministry and in partnership with our stakeholders. The final part of it, Mr. Chairman, is that, and before I hand over to the team, the final part of it is that there are some real procurement issues that we are also navigating as a country. It is very difficult to procure on the global supply chain access to batteries. And the batteries, the wait time, we are advised by entities, including the Barbados Light and Power, is between 18 to 24 months at a time. In some instances, we are also affected by the challenges of size and scale. What Barbados may think is a sizable investment in 200 megawatts may actually be small when compared to what is being procured to much larger economies. And so we are navigating what that may need to look like in terms of collaborating with partners as well as international development agencies. But I'm going to hand over to my permanent secretary, followed by the FTC, and then I'm probably going to ask Mr. Brian Haynes to give a brief comment as it relates to the IIRP.
Thank you, Minister. Honourable Chairman, honourable members, my name is Andrew Gittins. I'm Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Energy. I think the Minister would have covered the area pretty well, but I just want to raise two points that I think, well, is the fact that the storage is a challenge the policy, and clearly,
Speak into the mic.
would have some constraints in terms of us reaching some numbers we would like to reach. There are two issues that I like to highlight to this Honourable House. The one is that not all of the feeders have reached that terminal limit. So while there are some feeders and there's some applications which may be on hold pending the upgrade of the grid and storage, there's some areas where you still get an approval. So only as recently as last week, we approved or recommend approval for 250 megawatt system. So it's not all the feeders. There are about 52 plus feeders across Barbados, and there may be 7 or 8 that have reached the terminal limit. So there's still capacity being added to the grid, and that is one of the ways we are working around the issue. The other issue is that the government would have committed to a policy for each household a right to renewable energy, and one of the things we've agreed to with the utilities is that we will reserve a part of that capacity on all the feeders for households, so as to ensure that the smaller size systems will continue to be added to the system. So while it will be a challenge for some of the bigger systems, the smallest household types, 10 kilowatt, 15, they're still being added on the system. So those are totally ways that we are working in trying to ensure that the policy is kept on track. The one that the minister referred to also is we are working with the utility company in terms of trying to have storage on the grid, and we are collaborating with them, and the government have agreed that we would approach it with the utility and approach it as an opportunity for own ownership. So it's not that the utility will be the only company involved, but we are looking to invest and use local Barbadians as well as state entities to be involved in this process. So this is ongoing. We've received applications for storage licenses, and as the minister indicated, the policy was approved by Cabinet in March last year, and the FTC is currently working on tariffs. So those are some of the measures that we are currently implementing to ensure that the policy of 100% renewable by 2030 is not derailed. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister, and thank you, Chair. I would want first crave your indulgence in terms of tackling the question from two perspectives.
Just before you proceed, and this is for the benefit of all persons, members of the team, you introduce yourself first and give the office you hold in the particular agency or institution.
Thank you for that reminder, because the minister called my name incorrectly. So my name is Marcia Athley Ikechi. I am the CEO of the Fair Trading Commission. So going back, I said I want to tackle the question from two perspectives. One, in terms of broadening the discussion as it relates to storage and the part that it plays in the entire mix. Storage is but one segment of the transformation initiative. We have to look at the broader picture in the terms of bringing renewables onto the grid in the first place, and then ensuring that the grid is stable. The utility in and of itself is required to provide a certain level of service to Barbadians. We know that Barbadians have become accustomed to a certain level of service. When that does not obtain, then there is that outfall. So in order for us to be able to get to that level of service that is required, when we are at the same time introducing renewables, we have to do what is called grid modernization. We have to look at the control systems in place. We have to look at the transmission and distribution network. We have to look at all those things that allows the grid to remain stable 24/7. That is not an easy undertaking. It is technically challenged because it is about balancing. And the reality is, when you have a commodity that you are using to service the public of Barbados with, that does not allow ordinarily for storage to take place, then you have to look at these things. So it is really a product on demand. How do you do that? Then you have to look at things like variability of voltage. Those things, you have to use something called a synchronous condenser to be able to address those fluctuations in frequency and voltage. That is a must. You have to then increase the capacity of the transmission system. So you heard the PS speaking about feeders. only a few of them being at the maximum. But if we are going to look at 100% renewables, that means that the feeder sizes that we currently have are inadequate to serve the purpose. Because invariably over time, there'll be more and more feeders that require upgrading, that are reaching their thermal capacity limits. So we have to be able to do that groundwork in terms of increasing the capacity of those feeders. That is largely a job that has to be undertaken by the utility of itself. If I turn now to, and then there's the issue of transformers, how is that done? How can those be procured? Again, there's an issue of supply at this particular juncture. So those things, they go hand in hand, but how do we get to that point? Storage, on the other hand, we are at the point of developing a storage framework that will actually speak to the tariffs. Only one component, critical though it be, is only one component of that. The concern that the Commission has relative to storage and seeking to procure significant quantities of storage up front is the cost element that the Minister spoke to earlier. There are a number of different technologies that are either available to us now or in train that we believe may mitigate that significant impact, that $800 million that was spoken about earlier. For example, there's something called a flow battery, which not tried and true and tested at this particular point, but we believe it will become commercially viable in about 3 or 4 years' time. The other thing I believe you would have heard a few years ago, there was a lot of discussion about pump storage. That was Professor Hallmeyer, and he raised that issue. Again, the cost and the infrastructure outlay that has to take place for that to become a reality, that is a significant undertaking. So either way you cut it, storage is expensive. So then we turn then to how does the Commission, in terms of developing a tariff, find that balance that allows for storage to take place, but at the same time, recognizing that ultimately the customer will have to pay for that storage. We are of the view that it has to be an incremental rollout so that as we go further out and newer technologies become more competitive in terms of price, we will have access to those, as opposed to procuring everything upfront or committing or ordering upfront and then being locked into that particular arrangement. So those are some of the things that we will really need to be able to understand. The Commission has an onus at the end of the day to ensure that whatever it does in terms of setting rates, we take into account the impact on the consumer. That is part of our assessment. That is part of what we have to do, because if it is onerous, it is going to have an impact across the length and breadth of Barbados. Not only on the end consumer, it's going to have impact on business, it's going to have impact on how we engage other entities external to us. How do we strike that balance? It is not an easy undertaking, but that is something that we have to work toward.
Yes, good afternoon, honorable members. My name is Brian Haynes. I am the Chief Project Analyst in the Ministry of Energy and Business. My discourse will focus primarily on the Integrated Resource and Resiliency Plan. And this work was done between 2021 and approved in 2022. And it focused on a number of resources, including as well as storage, and how we would manage those resources in the implementation of the energy policy. In that regard, the scenario, there were 3 scenarios, and as a result of that work, scenario 3, which dealt with firm forced-in renewables such as biomass and more diversity such as wind and so on, was included into the scenario. The important thing with respect to storage is that it identified the importance of what type of services the particular storage is expected, storage technology is expected to bring. So in the very short run, in 2023, 2024, and remember we are dealing with long-term planning. So in the very short run, we are talking about 43, 44 megawatts of storage. We discussed at length during that work what types of storage technologies we could deploy. Those include 3-hour and 4-hour batteries, look at compressed air. Of course, Minister mentioned pump storage, and these types of technologies were discussed. In our discussions, as PS would have mentioned, we would have come up out of that work identifying a policy for storage. And from that, we are looking to develop the approach towards storage and the development of the resources to deal with IRP. For instance, a maximum of 20 to 25 megawatts of biomass by 2025 is targeted within the plan. And then we are talking about landfill gas plants of 1 megawatt and waste to energy of 8 megawatts. The plan, I would just mention, the plan had an investment cost of $2.59 billion over the period. Therefore, however, it must be taken into consideration that we spend within a 5-year period much more than that. And this is to be recovered over 25 years, 30 years of the life of the assets being considered. So I will rest there, Honourable Ministers.
Thank you. Actually, the FCC CEO, I will not attempt to pronounce your name and make that same mistake. But you answered my second question, which it recognizes that the Barbados State and Power, before they make any investment, they have to seek a rate of return, desirable rate of return. And I'm glad to hear that you will seek some balance, which will help small businesses and consumers who will ultimately have to bear the burden of those increased costs. And we know that it's breaking some of their backs. So I'm encouraged to hear that you will seek that balance in their interests. So my third question, since you answered the second one, pertains to natural gas. Now, my constituents demand that I tackle this again. Since last estimates, I posed this question to the honourable member from St. James Central. And at that time, it was expressed from the Ministry of Energy that natural gas was seen more as a bridging fuel. Now, as the honourable minister so eloquently described the current global crisis, especially as it pertains to batteries. So I think that we have to look at natural gas not only as a bridging fuel, but a serious source of clean energy. So I'm encouraged to hear that the ministry is going to be engaging in exploration, which will lower the input costs for natural gas, because currently, I believe, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Honourable Minister, we import in its liquid form and then we gasify, which is very expensive. But my question in the short term, until we can reap some benefits from cheaper input costs, is that I'm thinking of the Eagle Hall and especially the Eagle Hall and the Batsford Road area, which is in my constituency and shared by my brother from the city of Bridgetown, where there are a lot of commercial connections. And as I was told from the honorable member from St. James Central, that commercial connections do fetch a better return for MPC. So is there any way that in these areas where you have a lot of businesses and right behind them are many residences like the Orleans and Richmond, Barbary Hill, these residents become frustrated because they know that their connections there on the front road, but they themselves cannot get access. Is there any way that we can leverage the profitability of these commercial connections so that the people in the back can benefit?
Thank you. Thank you for the question, Honourable Member. I am going to ask a combination of the National Petroleum Corporation, which supplies gas locally, and the Barbados National Oil Company that imports the gas that you spoke about, to answer the question once I have just given a brief overview. Now, you are quite right. We import the vast majority of our natural gas resources, and the BNOCL, when they speak, they will tell you about the status of our existing natural gas wells here in Barbados and what kind of investment is necessary for us to be able to literally pump, pun intended, into those natural gas wells now in order to be able to expand our local production. And in the absence of that immediate injection of capital and investment into our natural gas wells, that we are indeed, as you have quite rightly said, importing the bulk of our natural gas. Now, MPC, and we're here in developed parliament, and sometimes we don't get these opportunities to share some of the real challenges that these entities encounter, and then how that in turn translates into costs to the public or costs to institutions. And the MPC will tell you that natural disasters like hurricanes in the north of the Caribbean can result in disruptions to that imported supply to the extent that we could see a multi-million-dollar increase in the cost of shipping. A shipment that would cost, under ordinary circumstances, just over $1 million in natural gas supplies would increase to $5 million for that single shipment, largely based on shipping costs. And what that has meant is that the company has had to absorb those costs because we cannot pass those on to consumers. And that obviously has a challenging impact on the company's balance sheet, and therefore it affects the ability for companies then to further provide the kind of capitalization that I described earlier in our natural gas wells and our resources onshore. So there are those kinds of challenges that the company is facing. But I want to give an example of what you have described earlier in terms of those commercial partnerships. We have started with the MPC and at the level of the ministry, working through with the productive sectors, in particular the largest manufacturers, first of all, to see how we can have that transition to take place. The West Coast, for example, which is a major tourist belt, they are all onboarded onto the natural gas pipeline, so that is there. You have the largest pulls on your natural gas being entities like your dairy, your banks holdings, and so on. They are pulling heavily on the natural gas network, but there are a number of other major producers that are not on the pipeline. And so we have been engaging through the leadership of the MPC in bilateral consultations with each of those entities to see how we can, in fact, onboard them to use natural gas. And why is that important? You would have manufacturers. One manufacturer has said to me in a bilateral meeting, but Minister, is it possible that the government of Barbados would provide concessions for us for diesel, because we use diesel to fire up our plant? Would we be able to say to you that the government would provide, would we be able to ask you for the government to provide concessions for diesel? And my answer to them is, I don't know that a country that is at this time navigating a net zero future for 2030 would want to go in that direction. What we can do is have a discussion with you about what your transition over to natural gas would look like. cleaner, if not clean, forms of energy in the interim, lowering your costs, and that's something that would be more consistent with the philosophy of the government and the Barbados National Energy Policy. The final thing that I would say is that the MPC has also been doing the exact kind of work that you described in Eagle Hall and in that adjacent area in St. Philip, in support of the new hotel project in Sam Lord's Castle. And I'm going to ask the general manager of the MPC to speak specifically about that work and what the company is doing to onboard new commercial entities.
Good afternoon, Honourable Minister, Speaker, and members of Parliament. Good afternoon, Honourable Minister, Speaker, members of Parliament. My name is Michelle Smith, and I'm the Acting General Manager of the National Petroleum Corporation. My minister spoke eloquently and to the point about the matters that are facing the MPC. I would want to say that MPC's intention is to try to onboard as many customers as possible, those both residential and commercial customers. At present, we are working on the installation of gas in the Sam Lord's Castle area, and we're using the opportunity to onboard a number of residential customers, over 122 at Councton, and continue to count members on the national grid, on the MPC's grid. Some of our challenges that we are currently facing, as Minister indicated, with the matter of capitalization of the actual works. However, we are working with customers to verify, to let them understand the cost of gas compared to other sources of fuel, and the intention, therefore, is for us to, we've employed a business development officer to assist us in reaching out to the customers and potential customers to ensure that they understand the value of natural gas to their businesses. As Minister said, it's the cleaner source of fuel for members to use. I rest at this point.
Thank you, Honourable Minister, Speaker, members of Parliament. My name is James Ram, the CEO of BNOCL. BNOCL recognizes the need to add natural gas to the grid. We recognize the fact that Barbados is moving to a cleaner environment, and natural gas being a bridging fuel, and also the cleaner of the fossil fuels, we know we need to add more. The challenge has been, over the last couple of years, BNOCL brings in all the gasoline, 60,000 barrels a month, all the diesel, 45,000 barrels a month, and the fuel oil for light and poor as well. The capitalization and the operation cost of the company is over $450 million. We need to maintain a certain working capital. The fact to add more natural gas to the grid, we've explored two different options. One, through drilling of new oil and gas wells at a minimal cost of $30 million, and also a secondary recovery project which will cost us at least $8 million. The overall cost of these projects, while is affordable, would have caused tremendous strain to the company while undergoing increasing costs of the fossils over last year. Last year, BNOCL's working capital moved from $37 million a month to over $86 million a month. And that places us in a position where we couldn't drill or we couldn't undergo any secondary recovery to add more natural gas to the grid. However, over the course of the next couple of months, BNOCL will be working with Heritage Fueling Company in Trinidad, who is currently doing a secondary recovery project, which looks to add more fossil fuels onto the network in Trinidad. And because of the similarity in our geological format, BNOCL will work with them to try to add more natural gas and more fuel to the communities in Barbados. So we look forward to at least incremental natural gas, whether it's in a significant format over the next 6 to 8 months. Thank you.
Thank you for that.
Thank you, Honourable Member for St. Michael West. Honourable Member for Christchurch West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. The first thing I wanted to talk about was Sarmler's Castle and the expansion there. But I think that that was covered to some extent, and I may come back to it if I get another opportunity. Then I wanted to talk about the batteries and what is the program for the feed-in tariff. But again, my colleague from St. Michael West took that up, and I'm not sure of the process to be able to get to the feed-in tariff for batteries. But that is something I think that we need to be able to explore, because the vast majority of people in Barbados are looking to the batteries. And it didn't help when they got letters, people who wanted to do photovoltaic systems, stating that they had to show what storage. And so they would be able to get their photovoltaic systems put in. So I'm going to go completely in a different direction and ask about the offshore blocks and ask what progress has the ministry made with respect to developing and doing the offshore blocks off of Barbados.
Thank you very much. This is again going to be a tag team, so I'm going to ask my PS to respond to the first part of your query, which you didn't actually ask. You said you were going to ask, and then you didn't ask, Honourable Member, which was specific about.
So you know that cannot count as a question then.
This is in relation to the letters issued to installers specifically and how that affects the issue of storage. And then I'm going to ask the combination of Mr. Jamar White, our geologist in the ministry, who has been anchoring the work that we are doing on the offshore blocks. And then I will give some closing policy remarks.
Thank you, Minister. In terms of the correspondence from the utility company, the intention behind that correspondence was to alert potential developers that because of the issue of storage, which we acknowledge is a reality, that was a way of them being able to still advance their projects, which would include two things. One, that they would make provision for storage, and as you are aware, the legislation doesn't mandate that you must have storage and generation as a license. You can apply for one or the other, or both. But they were suggesting that if the company or the developers had the potential, the ability, that they could have followed up with storage, and that would allow them to advance their project, or they can also agree to some level of curtailment. And let me say that far back as 2 or 3 years ago, we had some developers who, along with their project, had an element of storage built into it. There wasn't a tariff, it's not based on a tariff for which they would be paid, but they felt that was critical. So that was the intention of that letter, and we've had some discussions with the utility who also acknowledged that there was some sort of misunderstanding that comes by persons of the intent of that letter, and while it wasn't intended to be a letter saying that they could determine policy or determine how much, what, how or when storage, it was really a way of trying to facilitate persons who still felt that they wanted to go through with their project given the constraints of storage. All right? In terms of the feed-in, the question of feed-in tariff, as you also recall, the Cabinet in March or April last year approved the Barbados National Storage Policy, which provided for the way forward in terms of storage and spoke about the types of services that can be provided by storage. And that matter now is receiving the attention of the FTC. They are fairly advanced. I can't speak for them, but I know that they have a consultant on board, and as indicated by the CEO, they are working on a tariff. And we in the ministry, we are hoping, and based on what we've heard from them, that sometime in the future, not very far, that they will be in a position to offer a rate, then which will make it, at least people will know what is the type of returns they can make on investments. And as indicated, the FTC have indicated they are aware, very much so, of the need to strike that balance. I hope that addressed your question.
Hi, good afternoon, Honourable Chair, Honourable Members. Thank you for your question, Honourable Minister. My name is Jamar White, Director of Natural Resources in the Ministry of Energy and Business. In relation to the offshore petroleum program, when I was here last, I mentioned that we issued licenses to an international oil and gas company called BHP in early 2020. Now, BHP was since acquired by another company called Woodside Energy, which is a large international oil and gas explorer. So the company has been conducting its offshore exploration work in Barbados over the last 3 years, and they've made some substantial progress that we are very encouraged about. So they completed a 2,600 square kilometer 3D seismic survey offshore Barbados in an effort to better understand what the prospectivity was. From what we are hearing, and we are awaiting the official notice from the company, but from what we're hearing from the company is that the results look very encouraging. Now, we are aware of the national energy policy, which speaks to the development of our offshore resources for export, and the studies indicate that we are very prospective for natural gas offshore because of where we're located, because of other tests and studies that have been done. And that fits in very well with our national energy policy, with natural gas being a transition fuel and a cleaner source of energy. Now, with that natural gas, we believe that we have a substantial resource that can help us to not only power the country, but provide resources for export in the future. So with that said, we had some good results also in the last year, where Woodside, they have an 8-year exploration license, which is subdivided into 3 phases, a mandatory first phase of 3 years, and then 2 subsequent optional phases, the second of 3 years and the third of 2 years. The company last year opted into the optional second phase for one of the blocks, which points very well to the prospectivity of the acreage. They also brought on board another experienced international oil and gas explorer in the form of Shell to work alongside them in exploring the offshore acreage. Based on what they do in the industry, Woodside Energy and Shell are 2 of the most experienced companies in exploring for gas in deep water acreage. So that also basically boosts our confidence in terms of the prospectivity of the offshore and the potential for gas resources. Of course, we produce oil onshore, so there is always the potential of oil being offshore. And we have to kind of gauge that and balance that against our ambitions for, in terms of the energy transition and producing low carbon barrels and having a minimum impact on the environment. So these are things that will be looked at as we move forward. Net zero does speak to a balance between your emissions and what you can remove or prevent from being emitted. So we'll work with the company to seek to better understand what would be the best options for us as we move forward in the future. So in terms of the prospectivity, it looks very good. We seem to be very prospective for natural gas. There's also an associated potential for oil as well. And with Shell coming on, we believe that we will have some encouraging signs as we move forward. Of course, along with the existing exploration, we believe that continuing our marketing efforts to bring in additional companies in the offshore will also be a good strategy for helping to develop the offshore. Hence, the launch or the announcement of the launch of the licensing round last year. Of course, as Minister mentioned, we took some time to make some critical amendments to the legislation. The regional environment is very competitive with our neighbors in Guyana and Suriname doing very well. Of course, Trinidad has been in the offshore for quite a long time. So we had to ensure that our legal and regulatory frameworks were top-notch and competitive in the regional context. So we took the time to address some of those concerns, and I think Minister will address the remaining policy considerations surrounding the amendments to the legislation. So I hope I was able to give you at least a comprehensive overview of what we're doing in respect of the offshore. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. White. Clearly, obviously, you can't have 2 or 3 of your neighbors having significant fines and you in the neighborhood and not have a likelihood to have something too. And I think that is clear and evident. In fact, some of the fines are on the border. So it's something that we have to be very clear of, and I thank you for your explanation. The second matter that I want to discuss, I noticed that there are now 2 cruise ships, I believe, that were launched that are powered by LNG, liquefied natural gas. And does the Ministry of Energy now see the opportunity for cruise ships being powered by liquefied natural gas as an opportunity for us to be able to expand our receiving facility at the Bridgetown port, and then by extension use that to be able to expand our grid for natural gas for the people of Barbados?
Thank you very much, Honourable Member. Interestingly, maybe 3 weeks ago, we had a joint meeting between the Ministry of Energy, BNOCL, and NPC, and the Barbados Port, Inc., to discuss that very opportunity. And it really was about looking at not just cruise ships, but one among the rationales that we looked at for the provision of cleaner forms of energy to ships was that we wanted to ensure that we were able to have a year-round supply and demand relationship with commercial partners. And so we wanted to ensure that we were working jointly with cargo and cruise ships to be able to supply and to receive fuels in one instance. The BNOCL has begun discussions, and I want to ask them to elaborate a little bit more on what that could look like. In some instances, it requires built infrastructure. In other instances, negotiations and discussions have already started on the provision of barges to receive fuel in the first instance. And then in terms of us supplying fuel for export, that is what you would recall, Honourable Minister, that this Senior Minister, that this is still the Ministry of Energy and Business. And so there has to always be a commercial orientation to how we treat the development of the sector on the energy side. And so what we've sought to do is to build a business model around the provision of bunkering services to cruise ships, which will allow us to then export those fuel products even when we're importing them, perhaps by barges. And so that work is ongoing now as we speak. We have the very first LNG vessel that is going to be here shortly, and work on that would have started over 1.5 years ago, and that vessel will call Barbados home, as we know. And so the BNOCL has been engaging with the Bridgetown Port and with the cruise lines directly to ensure that they are the partner of choice here in Barbados. And why do I say here in Barbados? When the Honourable Prime Minister spoke about Barbados being a southern transshipment hub and to be able to create that transatlantic hub here in Barbados, I think we also have to bear in mind that certainly from the perspective of cruise, on the one hand, St. Kitts is providing bunkering services by barges offshore, and cruise ships have the option, if they're home porting in St. Lucia, to also procure fuel products there. So we have to make sure that the business case we build around the ships here in Barbados is a competitive one. That's in the Southern Caribbean. In the Northern Caribbean, we know that Antigua and Barbuda, they're also building an LNG facility in their port. And so what we're doing is rationalizing how Barbados can position itself, not just in the first instance to receive more ships, but to provide more energy services to those ships when they come to Barbados. But I'm going to ask the CEO of the BNOCL, Mr. James Brown, to elaborate in detail on what those things have been.
Thank you, Minister. Like I said before, BNOCL has been supplying most of the energy supplies onshore in the form of gasoline, diesel, fuel oil. And we've had several discussions over the last couple of months with Carnival with regards to how are they going to address the greening of their facilities as well. We spoke about liquid fuels as well. And early this year, Carnival approached us and asked a question about LNG. Now, we provide LNG in the form of ISO containers since 2015. And we were the first country in the Western Hemisphere to facilitate the regasification facility. Actually, in 2016, we were on CNBC as the first country to do that. Now, with regards to fueling ships, and this is truck-to-ship facilities, I mean, it's a simple thing, just as it's just as complicated as to offboard a ISO container. It is just as simple as do it to a ship. The thing is, the codes and standards are more highlighted because you're in the port. We had discussions with Carnival, and they said that they do want this first ship that's reached our land to be fueled by LNG. Now, this will be the first activity of sort in the Western Hemisphere. And Carnival did give us a short period of time, and the team at BNOCL, in conjunction with NPC, are well experienced in this space. I mean, we have to ramp up in a quick time frame, but we believe that we should be able to facilitate the fueling of ships to fuel LNG to the ships. Long-term perspective of that, yes, the LNG cost is mainly in logistics and also mass. The volumes that Barbados imports are very small. The other countries have been able to reduce their costs through the incremental through utility utilization. We haven't gone there yet, but hopefully we can reduce our costs through economies of scale and also reducing the logistical costs. So the long-term objective is being reviewed and analyzed, but in the short term, we over the next couple of weeks, we would like to be able to be the first country in this space to have truck to ship fuel and LNG.
So I tried to sneak in a part 2 of my question, but y'all didn't seem to pick it up. And I asked about how that affects the grid expansion. So I'm now going to have to ask it as a formal question, because, as I said, the LNG gives you an opportunity now, by virtue of being, once you can get that opportunity going with being able to fuel ships, it means that you will be able to buy more LNG. So by virtue of buying more LNG, that means that you will be able to do something on pricing, or will give you a commercial opportunity so that you can then use that bounty from the commercial opportunity of selling LNG to the ships to then give an expansion program for the rest of Barbados. And I am first and foremost the member for Christchurch West, and everything else falls from that. So I need to know, what expansion programs do you have in the works to be able to expand the grid of natural gas going to consumers? Now, I recognize that you're doing a mains replacement program. I recognize that. In fact, I also recognize that the Ministry of Transport Works and Maintenance is assisting you because you're not having to reinstate the places where they're doing their roads. So you're getting an additional bounty from that. So therefore, are you then going to have an opportunity to use these bounties to be able to expand the grid in other places where constituents all over Barbados are asking for natural gas to be able to come to their homes?
Thank you very much, Honourable Member. I'm going to ask the General Manager for NPC to answer that question, which I think we expected to be asked by any number of members in this chamber.
Thank you, Honourable Minister. Let me again state that the MPC intends to provide as much gas as possible to as many customers as possible on the network. You made a very valid point in respect of the agencies working together to reduce inefficiencies and to save costs where there's possible, to make sure that any installation or the upgrade of the utility services are maximized at the particular point in time. The MPC has a strategy in place, or we are working on our strategy to conclude it, I should say, in respect of how we're going to do our installations accordingly. As you would have heard said by BNOCL, the cost of LNG is very high, and the MPC's commitments to not only expansion, but also to make sure it honors its commitments to BNOCL to reduce their costs, to ensure that we pay them the amounts due to them. But the intention of the MPC, sir, is to ensure that wherever possible, we facilitate the capitalization of the expansion. At last check, it was $20 million, sir, to expand in 20 areas. And so we recognize that there is a need for us to have a strategy in place to ensure that the monies available are available to do the expansion and not to be reallocated elsewhere to cover costs that come on the NPC based on the cost of the product we currently import. I trust that answers your question, sir.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Minister, and your team.
Thank you. Thank you, Honourable Member for Christchurch West. Honourable Member for St. James Central.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I am, Mr. Chairman, mindful of the fact that I still carry the oversight responsibility for this sector. And so therefore, I do not want to be asking questions which throw the message of the Ministry of Energy into a state of confusion. So therefore, I'm going to ask you to bear with me, sir, while I go over certain things that have been said in this House, because I want to be absolutely certain that that which is communicated has been communicated with lucidity and absolute clarity. I want to begin, first of all, by complimenting your team, Minister, because your sector plays host to the highest concentration of solar photovoltaics to be found anywhere in the Caribbean and anywhere in the hemisphere outside of of North America, Canada and United States of America. It is equally true to say that your sector plays host to the highest concentration of electronic buses, which are to be found in the Caribbean. And when the tongues of critics wag, very often the successes are not the stories that are told. We live in a very transformative age, and there is a tremendous fluidity in the developments. We came to this place in 2019 and we laid a national energy policy. That energy policy passed both houses of parliament, and it saw biomass, photovoltaics, solar photovoltaics, wind energy as being the concentration of the effort. It would be true to say that today there are applications which you all are being asked to look at which go beyond, wind was also part of that. And it would be true to say that there are applications today which go beyond that and actually start to take into consideration the question of hydrogen. That was not to be found anywhere in the national energy policy. I made that point to emphasize the fluidity of the time we live in. Mention was made earlier of an integrated, an IRRP, the Integrated Resource Resiliency Plan. And that too is but a snapshot in time. Study is done anticipating the needs of this economy at the moment in time when the study was done. Obviously, changes in the rate of growth and the scale of demand, et cetera, will have implications for the plan and its delivery. And I say all of that to come to the point about the use of nascent technologies. Mention was made, for example, of flow batteries. I want for you to be able to portray to the country an element of certainty in policy. And as you know, Minister, certainty in public policy is absolutely necessary. The nascency of the flow batteries, they are not yet commercially proven. 3 to 4 years, they may actually become commercially proven. That would take us to 2027. But that time doesn't necessarily work well with the fact that we have an investment requirement that is immediate. In addition to that, we have a 2030 target that is set with respect to certain commercial projections and revenue anticipated levels of revenue associated with it. So the question therefore becomes, how does an investor or a potential investor, having heard all that they heard today, now feel about the issue with respect to feeder lines in Barbados? It has been said that there are 54 feeder lines and that there are only 7 or 8 that have reached a state of concern in terms of their capacity. The question then is, so that we can give certainty to the investor out there, where are their challenges on those 7 or 8 feeder lines? And what is the level of capacity existing in the other feeder lines, so that a person who is saying that he or she wants to have an investment of $1 million, $2 million, or even more in the energy sector in Barbados is able to say, these are the geographical areas that I feel that I would be inclined now to look at, and these are the areas where it would be ill-advised. And that is the reason why it began the way it began, Mr. Chairman, because as the minister with oversight to responsibility of the productive sector, this is about engaging with the people of Barbados and potential investors from outside so as to ensure that this country has foreign exchange options And I am concerned when I hear things said that might smear the opportunities which we are trying to create for those people and for this country. Minister, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Senior Minister. Let me start perhaps by saying that the Barbados National Energy Policy as at 2019 and the Integrated Resource and Resiliency Plan as at 2021 are all rightfully, as described by the Honourable Senior Minister, being overtaken by time and transformation in technology and research and development. And it is on that basis that we as a ministry have begun to engage with the United Nations Special Envoy for Energy to begin to look at what the updating of those instruments need to be. And so we are working with an entity called C for All, and so it is not an energy audit at all. What it is that it looks at what has transpired since 2019 in the energy space in terms of policy making and what is being required for a country that has a 7-year window through to its target in 2030, and then what the IIRP, although it was just done in 2021, now needs to consider. Because as we mentioned, there is an energy mix, and on the basis of the energy mix, the different types of energy that we were speaking to in 2019, transformation has taken place in the technology and in the industry overall, and so Barbados has to be able to keep pace so that there is absolutely at a policy level a certainty of policy as articulated and codified in updated documents. That work is going to commence. I believe our kickoff meeting takes place on the 6th of March, and so we will be engaging. What we started to do, Mr. Chairman, was internal to the ministry. We reviewed what was being submitted by the UN Special Envoy for Energy and her team. We then shared what was being proposed with all of the industry stakeholders, including those in the private sector, so that we were then able not just to have an updated plan, but what investment is going to be necessary to overlay that plan. The country that they just completed, Mr. President, Mr. Chairman, was Nigeria, a major oil producing economy. They just completed work on reviewing over the course of 8 months or so what Nigeria's energy transition needed to look like. Now, Nigeria has a transition target of 2060. And so they are rationalizing that it will take close to $110 billion, $160 billion to be precise, to be able to facilitate the transition that Nigeria envisages in terms of investment. So we now want to be able for Barbados to look at what sectors, subsectors, mixes for both energy and storage, and what future technologies may be available or that were not available at the time of its conceptualization, and what level of investment will be necessary for that to actually be operationalized. That work has begun in the preparatory work, that is, and we are about to kick it off on the 6th of March. We met with the UN team in January this year. That was our first meeting with the team, and so our first in-person meeting with the team, and so we expect that work to be completed over the course of 4 months, because we don't have a lot of time to wait for that to take place over any extended period of time. That brings me then to the question of what feeders are full, because we have created an existing framework as at 2021 in its latest incarnation with the IIRP. We are now updating 2019 and 2021 instruments in 2023, which would suggest typically when you do a plan, action plan, strategic plan, visioning plan, it takes 10 years, 20 years. In this sector, because it's so fast moving, we haven't even been able to wait, in the case of the IIRP, for more than 2 years before we are already doing the updates from policy. And what the industry has said, because we have kept them walking side by side, hand in glove with us every step of the way, what the industry has said is, listen, if the government tells us that the transition time for X to Y is going to be in a year, then our end of life, and in the case of one business, they said to us, our major infrastructure in our plant, our major equipment in our plant has an end of life of approximately 2 years. If the government has certainty of policy, the certainty of policy of which the honourable member just spoke, we can make the investment to have that transition done within that time frame so that we're able to move from diesel-powered equipment to LNG-powered equipment or even other forms of energy. And so we're doing that work at the individual business level so that we're able to map what the investments need to be. Now, in terms of the feeders, one of the conversations that we have had with the utility has been just that. We need to map Barbados. We needed them to map Barbados and to be able to say, these are the feeders that are experiencing challenges because we are close to capacity, and to encourage investment in other areas where the feeders are not in any way close to what the capacity is. And I'll give you an example. Anytime we're in a zone of around 5,000 kilowatts or so, we're in dangerous space. And I want to ask Mr. William Hines, to speak about what these feeders look like, but we get a monthly update of what is installed, what is licensed but uninstalled, where no license is required and then uninstalled, and what the totals would be. So we have the feeders. I can look at them here in front of me, but I'm going to ask a technical official to go through the details, and then I will come back. Mr. William Hines.
Honourable Ministers, Members of Parliament, thanks for having the opportunity to answer that question. Before I tell you what the feeders look like, let me just, in layman's term, explain what they are. For the average person that looks up on the network of wires that transmit electricity, we just see a network of wires, sometimes some bigger, some smaller, some higher, some lower. For the utility, this network of wires is grouped into wires that offer services to certain areas. Utility has grouped these network of wires into 54 areas where they are covered. So they're called feeders. So each feeder has a name that represents a geographical area where the electricity is supplied. Prior to a few years ago, the electricity was going one way, but now with renewable energy, the electricity is going two ways. It's supplying electricity along the feeder, and it's picking up electricity from those areas. As the minister says, that we get information from the utility on a monthly basis, and we have an idea of what the feeders carry. Basically, the utility has the feeders in terms of capacity carrying in 3 areas: what is already installed, what is committed to, and the total. So for the 1st of January 2023, we can say that in terms of actual installed, connected to the utility, there is only one feeder, and that is the Green Hill feeder, that exceeds the 5,000 kilowatts of actual capacity that physics would allow it to carry. Having said that, based on the updated information, there are a few more feeders that have both the installed and the committed there. So those feeders are the Arch Hall feeder, I mentioned the Green Hill feeder, also the Newton feeder, and finally the Sam Lord's Castle feeder. The Sam Lord's Castle feeder basically does not exceed the capacity. It is actually a small amount, about 2,700, but they already have a commitment in terms of those licenses. So basically, the information on the feeder changes, and in some cases it increases, and in other cases, the amount of people that have committed, there may be some persons who are no longer committed or their license has expired, and therefore it's dropped down. So I can say, based on the January the 1st, 2023 report from the Barbados Light and Power Company, there are those 4 feeders that currently exceed the 5,000 kilowatts. Thank you.
If I can perhaps use the data that is from the Barbados Light and Power submitted as of February 1, 2023, what we can say is that I'll start first by outlining the feeders that are at their highest capacity. The feeders at their highest capacity of both installed as well as prospective, because it is licensed but not yet installed on the grid. We have Arch Hall, which is pretty high in terms of almost reaching capacity. We have Newton, also in that same category. Sam Lords is actually in excess already of its current capacity. And then we have 3 additional feeders that are nearing capacity at Sewell, Sunbury, and Wildy, respectively. So those are the feeders that are already, let me go over that again. Arch Hall is already over its designated capacity. Same thing with Newton, same with Sam Lords, and we have Sewell, Sunbury, and Wildy nearing capacity. Those are the ones that we would want to avoid. All of the others we have below capacity.
Thank you, Minister. So therefore, you have a situation in which you have about 48 of 54 feeder lines where there is capacity for investors to do that which they would wish to do. And that is the clarity of purpose that I wanted to bring to this discussion. Very closely annexed to that is the question, or aligned to that rather, is the question of the just transition which you referred to in your opening statement. Because even as we say to the country from this place that there are 48 feeders in Barbados where you have nothing to worry about, the truth of the matter is that we want for Barbadians to be part of the investment process along the lines of the average householder in Barbados, the average Barbadian. That is the just transition that I presume that you're talking about. The just transition, in my judgment, must also speak to the relationship that I would wish to imagine you have with the financial houses that must back the investor financially, because they too must have clarity and certainty, and the state-owned enterprises who are very burdened. We inherited a government where, for example, the Water Authority, the National Housing Corporation, the Transport Board, and many of our state-owned enterprises carried heavy debts. And one way of taking the debt off of the back of the cost of operation off of the back of the state-owned enterprise, which is essentially taking it off of the back of the people of Barbados, is for them to be put in a position where they can generate their own electricity and sell into the grid, and therefore be in a position where they are receiving income and offsetting some of the cost of operation. That is the policy of the government. What I would want you to do is to be able to elaborate a little bit on your relationship with, insofar as this aspect of the business is concerned, with the financial houses, and any policy comments you might wish to make with regard to the state-owned enterprises. And last but not least, any policy comment you might wish to make with respect to that one part of the energy mix that you have not yet spoken to, and that is wind. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honourable Member. Let me start first by speaking about the just transition. Now, when you look at the principles of the just transition, which in some instances make it very clear that if we were, say, for example, in a different country, if we were not in Barbados and we were in another country where you were producing, let's say, coal, I use that as an example. There are many people who would have been working in that sector, who would have been engaged in coal mining, for example, for whom a transition has to be necessary, because it's fine for us to say at a policy level that we are transitioning into cleaner forms of energy, but simultaneously the people, the real people who are working every day in that industry, still have to be accommodated so that their lives and livelihoods remain central to government policy. And we have done that, and we've seen that happening with the transition of industries like sugar, where we retooled and we retrained skills in order to position the people for new jobs and the future of jobs. And equally so in the energy space, we are now looking to ensure that Barbados can transition away from the traditional oil and gas, the dirty forms of fuel, the fossil fuels, and that our people have an opportunity not only to transition into new jobs and to new skills, but that we are able to create new opportunities for skills development. A few weeks ago, we saw a model that was being done by an institution based in Scotland, in Aberdeen, Scotland. And they were able to begin looking with us at the energy mix. And on the basis of the energy mix, they were rationalizing the jobs of the future that would be necessary to help to drive an economy. And this was one of the things that I said earlier today in my opening remarks at the Storage Forum. Under my ministry, it is my intention to begin the mapping of Barbados's future education sector as it relates to energy in collaboration with the Ministry of Education, so that we are able to say our energy mix, our storage mix, our transitioning is premised also on people and not just on technology, and that these are the skills that are going to be required for our energy future. These are the areas of training that are going to be prioritized for us to produce new workers, new graduates, and with it, new industries as well, so that people remain centered and that it is fair to all concerned when we transition from one form to another. Now, I'm going to ask PS to speak about the role of commercial state-owned enterprises and our SOEs, because that has been a critical component of our policy decision as well, and there's actually been a paper that was done on that. But I'm going to close my initial comments by responding to the query on wind. We already have one wind project that has been approved onshore at Lambert's, and over the course of the last 2 weeks, we have completed signature of the agreements between the Barbados Light and Power Company and the International Financial Corporation of the World Bank to begin the process of data sharing. The National Petroleum Corporation is working alongside the entities to be able to begin the wind study work and to put the infrastructure in place, and that has already started. We completed over the course of just the last 2 weeks meetings with the Inter-American Development Bank, who are also going to be partnering with the government of Barbados. And why? We want to make sure that in the same way that we have gone so far along the journey with PV, and in fact, I don't want to contradict the honourable member, but Barbados is not that country in the hemisphere that has installed the highest level of capacity in PV. Barbados is the second highest country in the world that has a density of PV penetration. I believe we are surpassed globally only by Australia. That is what our technicians have been proud to be able to say. So there has been a lot of work done on this small island developing state in the area of PV. And so it is our intention to now move to expand our PV network, but also to deal with other forms of energy, including wind, which we accept may not be as intermittent in the same way as our solar PV industry may be. And the final comment there would be that we are hoping to be able to collaborate also with an entity out of Scotland to be able to expand what we do in particular with offshore wind, as well as, you know, Scotland has an expansive network of offshore wind farms. And so we are going to be working collaboratively with those who have done this before, done it well, and brought the people into their conversations. And we are going to be doing that with both on and offshore wind. PS?
Thank you, Minister. As you correctly said, the ministry have worked on the paper to ensure that the local sector, this energy sector, is locally owned by and large. Unlike the fossil fuel sector, which is owned by internationals, and at one stage we had a share in the utility company, we have done a paper which, based on the last budget that was presented by the Honourable Prime Minister, speaks to the energy sector, this renewable energy sector, 40 to 50% being owned by locals and state-owned enterprises. Recently, we met with the Barbados Agriculture Management Company, and that one of their planks to keeping that sector alive is using renewable energy to help them to help develop their businesses, and we have some discussion with them. We've also had that paper where we are making carve-outs for the state-owned enterprises, the Transport Board, the QEH, the third sector, as well as local at the average Barbadian. So this policy and what we're working on, the plan is to ensure, and that was supported by a policy, a cabinet decision that said that at least 30% of all investment in the sector must be owned by local companies of Barbadians. So that is really the plan, that at the end of the day, this sector will be owned close to 40 to 50% by local companies and local individuals. We recognize that Barbadians alone, we don't have the capacity to do it ourselves, so we're not saying that we're ignoring that there's going to be international involvement, but we don't want the sector to develop like the fossil fuel sector, which is owned by internationals. So that is the plan in place, and that is what we're working at this stage. I also want to raise the point that, you know, sometimes when I hear about the energy sector, sometimes I get the impression that people believe that we are saying that we're going to transition today. It is a policy that says 2019 to 2030. And I just want to bring some context to say that currently we have at least 85 megawatts on the grid. And that is moving from maybe one or two a few years ago. Let me just also say that this financial year so far, starting April 1, as I speak, over 215 megawatts of licenses were approved. So that's 215 plus the 85. So, and we still have another couple hundred applications still under active consideration. So the sector is taking off, and we believe that there is opportunities. One of the things we have to look at really though, in truth, is that we are talking about the energy mix. And yes, the mix spoke about wind, it spoke about biomass, and it spoke about solar. But so far, the uptake on solar is far exceed our expectation. Is something that we may have to look at when we do a review. But let me just say, and just in concluding that, yes, there's still opportunities in the sector though for wind. And as the minister correctly said, there's plans, and we are working now with the IFC, and the cabinet agreed that they will act as transaction advisors to the government of Barbados to develop the Lamberts project, which initially there was plans to have a 10 megawatt wind farm there. And based on what we're discussing with the IFC and based on what the cabinet agreed, there's the possibility, if the capacity can be held there, that there'll be a 50 megawatt plant down there. And that is something which, as the minister just indicated, active work is started, and we expect that this should be something that can be a reality within a 2-year period. And finally, they're also looking at the offshore sector in terms of wind. We are also, as indicated by the minister, she visited Scotland earlier this year, Nicole, and they had discussion with the Scottish government to see how they can help us, because they are leaders in the offshore sector in terms of the offshore wind. And there is also work in train to develop offshore wind in Barbados. Let me say that that is a much longer horizon, but it is within the time frame that we have. So there's a plan, we have certain projections, and we are expecting that, all things being equal, that is one of the projects that we believe come around 2030 that can, can take off. So let me just say that these are all activities, and all of them are guided by the fact that we expect that there will be local participation, both at the institutional level, but also at the level of the individual.
And just to close, Senior Minister, to say that the kickoff meetings for Barbados Wind will be taking place during March 6th to 7th of this year. So it is not something that we're talking about, but we're actively progressing as we go forward over the coming weeks.
Thank you very much, PS and Minister. Let me say to you that I continue to be inspired by the dedication and fervor that you both show in bringing leadership to this very important and transformative sector. Mr. Chairman, I don't have any further questions.
Thank you, Honourable Member. We have to conclude. We have to conclude at this time, and Honourable Minister, you may give your wrap-up.
I beg to move that we suspend this sitting and that you report to His Honor the Speaker progress. And ask leave to sit again.
The question is that I do the report progress to His Honors the Speaker and ask for leave to sit again. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. Honorable members against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
The chairman has reported progress and requests leave to sit again. Honourable Member Joseph.
Speaker, I beg to move that we suspend today's sitting until Wednesday morning at 10.
Question that this honourable chamber be suspended until Wednesday, the first day of March at 10 a.m. in the forenoon. All those honourable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. This honourable chamber stands suspended until Wednesday, the first day of March, 2023 at 10 a.m. in the forenoon.